So this is a short discussion, slightly shorter than what we thought, about, first of all, I think the question, are we doing the right thing? And secondly, where do we go from here? Some of you know that I think art-science collaboration in general is nothing brand new. However, the fact that it's increasingly also the interest of public funding programs, and in particular of funding programs in the realm of science, that's relatively new. And we have two very good examples here with us today. So instead of introducing the whole panel, I'll just introduce you as I ask you to contribute to our discussion. It's natural to start with the Commission, since what you have just heard is funded by a program of the EC. It's actually a technology and science program, FET, Future and Emerging Technologies. And it includes now an activity in the realm of arts. But Ralph, you are with the Commission and you have in the past been very active in this area, with the STARTS program in particular. If you look back, what do you think has been achieved, and maybe also what has not yet been achieved so far?
Well, what has been achieved is essentially the idea as such is put on the funding landscape. It wasn't clear up to the time when we started STARTS that anybody would consider the art as a viable means of having innovation in Horizon 2020. So this is, I think, what was achieved. And I think this is not little, because there were resistances both on the art front and on the technology front to the very idea of bringing these two areas together. Now, what has not been achieved, I think, is to really immerse artists into our framework program and our funding program, so in the Horizon 2020. It started slowly. FEEDS is a very good example thereof. But even FEEDS is an afterthought, right? So you have your project and then at the end you bring in the artists. What we would like to achieve is that from the very conception of the project and of the proposals for projects, people think about the art as an integral part of any innovation process that leads to jobs and growth. And finally, what we are doing in the Commission, we are funding projects that lead to jobs and growth. And I guess this is the heart of the idea of STARTS, to really put forward this idea of art as a catalyst of new products, new developments out of the knowledge created in H2020. Mm-hmm. And I think this is at this point missing, but of course we started this whole area 3 years ago, and as you know, in the Commission, timescales are not so short, right? So I guess what we achieved is good, but it's far not good enough.
Okay. Thorsten, I'll ask you, because you're one of the scientists. So can you agree with this? Would you like to see the artistic endeavor to start earlier? Can you conceive a situation where you have this as a part of the project conception phase?
Sure. So when you ask us, you have your grant, your scientific grant, has to contain not only a dissemination component, but really an artistic component, which in my view goes beyond just the mere dissemination to the general public, then we will definitely start doing this already in the design of the consortium. Maybe it will actually influence how the consortium will be set up. So I think, I think this should be the order it is done. It should be a viable part already at the conception phase, and should be evaluated too, how well this is done or how interesting or inspiring it could be.
You are the coordinator of nuClock. So what are your expectations with respect to the artists? So why bother? Why bother?
Well, because it's interesting. Because I think I think it gives a feedback also back into the research and the science and the scientists who are doing it. So to some extent, we are forced to explain things. We are forced to view things from a perspective that is not our own. We are questioned. The motives, but also the means are at least well questioned and investigated by somebody who's not taken everything for granted and who hasn't undergone the same machinery that we have. So it opens the perspectives. In the present case, we actually come down to that the artist proposes new materials that I already have new ideas how to integrate them into my research. So there is definitely a stimulus into the research that comes from the scientist. That's why bother.
Okay. Luis Miguel, Girão, I don't think you need a lot of introduction in this scene here. You are with Artshare. It's been around for a while. What would you expect from the funding side in the future? What do you think can we take? What are the experiences from the last years that need to be carried on in the future? And what probably has to be enforced? Where do we still have room for getting a bit better than we have been doing in the past?
Well, I believe that, as Rolf just explained, the ground to start doing things that are significant and relevant is there. So I think now it's up to us, the community, to deliver something that is indeed significant and relevant. And in order to do so, I believe we have to go beyond illustration of ideas. What it also said, that it's not just about dissemination of getting people connecting more with the arts. We have to make the Commission and all the other institutions, because I also work with other institutions in this field. For instance, I also work with NATO, which is an interesting institution to work with. But I think we have to make clear that artistic practices generate knowledge. There's a body of knowledge that comes out from these artistic practices, as they come from scientific practices, as they come from technological or engineering practices. And this, I don't think, is yet there, not only because if something is new, as you said, in a context where research funds normally go to science or to engineering or to practices that are more common in this field, so the arts are new in the field of research, but also because we testify that there's a new generation of artists that are more tech-savvy, that have more deep scientific knowledge, as we've seen here. So a better understanding of the concepts that need to be addressed in order to achieve new ideas. Right.
Since you mentioned knowledge, I think we have to ask Andrea Wald here, who's sitting next to you. Andrea Wald is from the Austrian Science Fund, so she's used to funding scientists, but you are actually in charge of a program that interacts with the arts, perhaps a bit differently from what we've seen. Maybe you can say a few words about what you've been doing in the past, and then what you think about this idea that knowledge arises not just in science, but also in the arts. Andrea.
Right. Thank you. So as you said, I work for the Austrian Science Fund, but for a small but very nice program that is called PEAK, Programm zur Erschließung und Entwicklung der Künste. It's a program for arts-based research. It actually works the other way around. So what you just said, you would like to see the artists come in earlier. PEAK starts from the artist. That comes from our belief that science as well as art does some kind of basic research. The Austrian Science Fund is a promotion agency for basic research, so not applied research, but basic research. What we are funding with the PEAK program is not art as such, not the artist or art as a project, but arts-based research, so art as a method to explore new perspectives on art, but also new perspectives on the world as such. So what we, in other program categories, we fund basic research in the natural sciences or in the social sciences, with PEAK, we believe that art or artistic exploration can actually find blind spots in the objects, the research objects that are also looked at by the natural sciences or other sciences, and that they can actually work together. So what we see in the PEAK program is that we start from an arts-based research methodology, and then the artists bring in all kinds of other scientists or other researchers at their disposal. So we really have a very interdisciplinary project there.
Is this ever contested? I mean,
By who?
Yeah, that's my. I mean, I don't know.
The question is it ever, but by who?
Within the fund, or do the scientists complain, or is everybody happy?
I would say everyone complains.
Okay.
No one is happy. Exactly, it's Austria, and also, if we look at the Austrian Science Fund as at the Austrian Research Fund as a whole, we have a stabilized budget. The application numbers are rising. We can't fund all the interesting and exciting research that is out there. That is the case for all other programs, and it is also the case for the PEAK program. Each year we have a number of really exciting applications, and we can also only fund a handful. So people from the different universities or institutions, art institutions, are complaining for a number of reasons, because they have excellent reviews and still we can't fund everyone. So really the most minor points of criticism have to be taken up. That's a problem. Another problem is that, as you said, the relation between artistic practice or arts-based research and technology is still a very new field. So more traditional institutions, art institutions, complain that they would like to be funded as well. That is a problem, I'd say. But we're very happy about this focus on art-based research as a methodology, and I think that has proven, the program exists since 2009, and that has proven a very good way forward. Right.
Yeah. Špela, as an artist, can I ask you? You have some experience with, I guess, with artistic funding sources and with this sort of engineering science funds. Does it make a difference for you? Is it?
Well, in a way, I think it's science is actually still a part of society that does get more funding than the arts, and in this sense, it's nice to also channel some of this funding to a very, very important part of society. I think that the fear of most of the artists that are, kind of going into a partnership with the industry or engineering development technologies is that we would somehow have to produce works that would be to the taste of the scientists or technologists. And I've done this, I've had the BioArt and Design Award in a similar situation, and this one, and it's sort of a fear that hasn't yet come true, perhaps also because we are just, standing our ground. Another great benefit from this type of funding is that automatically you are offered access, which otherwise takes months to gain, going from institution to institution, begging to be heard, and for the scientists to have the time for you. So this is kind of included in the package, which is great, sort of the willingness of the scientific partners to collaborate.
Yeah, that's a good answer. Industry was mentioned, Christophe, which we didn't talk about that, but I think GLUON, which you're in charge of, also has or makes an effort to connect with industry. Something which has not yet been mentioned. Can you perhaps elaborate a bit on this and what you would expect from the future? Maybe if I may add the question, and really should we use art for that? Can they pay for it by themselves?
Well, so for GLUON, it was like a challenge for me. I had to include industry because we were not funded by the government in the beginning. And I had to go into the market. And I had to try to convince industrialists that working with artists in their R&D departments was interesting for them. It's something very difficult because industrialists, they even don't know what art is in general, contemporary art, let alone that they understand what we do, which is very difficult for them to understand that it is also a form of art. So we created a collective of industrialists in Belgium. It's like 25 people. And we started to travel with them and to visit exhibitions or artist studios where the artists were allowed to explain their work to the industrialists. And we went to Olafur Eliasson, for example, Thomas Saraceno in Berlin. And slowly but certainly they started to understand what would be the value for them or for their research to take part into something like GLUON and why they would connect with artists. Now, that's the beginning, to convince the industrialist. The second thing is that you have to find the resources in order to give enough funding to the artists to work within the R&D departments of the companies. And there I hope in the future that there will be like a private-public partnership between the governments, the cultural governments, and between the economic governments in Belgium, so that the cultural government can say, we will pay, for example, the fees of the artists so that they can spend 6 months within the company. Because companies, they always say, we will fund the expertise, we will give this to the artists, we will give all the materials they need, but it's very difficult to convince them to pay the fees. So I think public-private partnerships in the future are very important for what we do.
Yeah. There are at least 3 objectives that you find when you read the texts of programs for art-science collaborations. One is science communication and connects with the citizen, I think. The second one is knowledge, which we have already mentioned. And then the third one is industry, which then probably goes more in the direction of design, innovation. Do you think that's right? Is that not overloading the art-science collaboration with all sorts of various goals and objectives, or do we just need different programs? How do we? What should we do in the future? I think because these are very broad aims. Just before it was mentioned that actually artists may feel overwhelmed by this obligation to communicate science to the citizen. What do you think about this? Should there be a specific objective, or is it just happening?
I don't know, but thinking about objectives, I think you cannot organize something like objectives. There's so many industries, there's so many artists with different ideas. And I always liked what Billy Kluver did when he was working for the Experiments in Art and Technology program in New York. So he organized a big fair where the researchers from companies, but also from research institutions, were presenting their research to the artists. And then the artists could buy, they learned what the scientific people did, and the connections were like organized, not in an organized way. And I think that a program like START should invite like many people, should connect, should do a big effort to invite big industrialists to come with the artists, to invite the artists so that they can see what they do in their departments, but that also the industrialists see what the artists do. And in a very non-organized way, I think there might happen very interesting connections.
Mm-hmm. Ralph, from the point of view of the Commission, I guess do you agree these are all the objectives that you're supposed to fulfill, or can you focus on just some of them?
Well, these are 3 objectives for 3 different programs, right? As you know, we had for a long time, I guess for, 30 years, art science programs in the Commission, which were mainly about dissemination and communication. And I think this is a viable goal, and this was a viable goal for 30 years. To have art as an ingredient in the knowledge creation and product development process is a new idea. And it is a new idea which is very often contested on both sides. So I think it is an interesting idea, but it needs a further development. I mean, from the art side, we heard there is this fear of being instrumentalized, which I very often hear. From the technology side, there is the conviction of irrelevance of the art world, right? So, and you have to bring these 2 different convictions, which are typical European convictions. I think in America they are much more open to these ideas. You have to bring these 2 convictions sort of to a clash, and you have to see that probably these convictions are wrong, or not. I don't know, but I think it's very different to say artists are there for dissemination, for explaining research to the general public, or to say the artists are an integral part of the development process. So I don't think this is the same level of funding. And certainly STARTS is of the second type.
Thorsten, you have been shaking your head, so you think it is red. How do you
I'm not shaking my head in opposition. I'm shaking my head because I want to add something.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
So first of all, I would say that already the science has many faces and many forms. I think art-science collaborations will have even more faces and forms, and so it's hard to define like gatekeepers that can all be fulfilled by all of these various types of collaborations that we'll establish. As you said, some will be more the dissemination side, some will more the critical questioning side, evaluating the impact of the research on society, and so on and so on. What I'm not entirely d'accord with is this feeling of, well, the scientists don't bother, and they start bothering once they have to because their science funding may be coupled to an arts program. So I think that may be true on a high or intermediate level, but on the kind of bottom-up thing, it really works. So the scientist that goes, the researcher that meets the artist, that always functions. At least that's what I would claim. So I think there is a strong willingness to collaborate, at least in the facts, in the flesh, in the happening. Why there's the impression that on the institutional level this is not the case, I can only speculate, but I hope this can be overcome quickly.
You see, we are here preaching to the convinced, right? So I mean, I'm very often talking to people who are not among the convinced. This is why my
shaking shouldn't be too serious.
I can assure you, I was giving a presentation in Manchester a couple of weeks ago together with some parliamentarians. In the end, I got 2 questions. The first was a question from a lobbyist for startups. He said, "Why do you invest into artists? Why don't you put the money into investing into startups?" So the conclusion was, why bother about artists? The second question I got was from an artist, because I always bring the Apple iPhone as an example of a very good collaboration between the art world and the industry world. And this artist said, why would artists contribute to the iPhone which pollutes the world? You see, it was this typical European way of saying, well, there is technology, which is dirty, there is art, which is useless, right?
You're saying we need more arts lobbyists?
So I think there is an issue of silo thinking in Europe. And I guess if we don't overcome that, then we will have a hard time getting further with STARTS.
Actually, my question would be, does where do you actually manifest the work? For example, okay, we have now a residency which will result in perhaps in artworks. Where will these artworks be shown? Is this for a gallery, you know, or is this something that we should be more manifesting within these institutions to get the most out of this collaboration? So like you said, one-on-one, there's always something happening, you know, some chemistry. But then I would say that most of this chemistry is lost on the peers, even of the institution, that perhaps pass you by for months wondering, what are you doing there? And it's a strange face.
Well, can I just ask, because this is something that interests me as well, which comes back, I'm sorry, to this citizen communication in part. Very often art is elitist, not in what it does, but in the kind of people it communicates with. It happens in galleries, it happens, you know, in art spaces that are theoretically open to everybody, but not in practice. Now science is even worse because it's truly elitist, and now we combine the two. What do we get? On the other hand, there is Ars Electronica, and you could probably argue that this is certainly not elitist. So, Luis, Miguel, I'm asking you because you're a researcher as well as an artist, and you are also in the middle. Is this an argument pro or against? Or maybe is it good to be elitist because we are targeting people with money?
Well, but I think you put it brilliantly well. Congratulations on that. I think it's quite true what you said. I cannot, if you ever hear me praise towards elitism, please call my doctor, right? I don't think elitism leads nowhere in principle. It might be a need of the human race to be led, and then you might conceive that. But in principle, I don't think it needs to be supported because it exists as such, and is a way of the strongest of the race to come together. What I think is interesting to look at is exactly that this integration of artistic individuals in the context might lead to an openness on both ways. Because from my perspective, what happens is that in both ways, it's very difficult to reach a sustainable way of practicing. Not for artists, it's very, very difficult to enter into the market of the big galleries, the big cultural centers, because the way the loop is designed is exactly in the way of containing these new introductions. And the same, as you said, is happening in science. So I believe that because of the artistic nature of wanting to change even sometimes the whole world, new doors might be opened, right? And this, historically speaking, from an artistic history point of view, we are not doing no more than expanding what our predecessors from movements like Fluxus were doing. They already back then were trying to get out of the galleries and bring artistic expression to real life, right? And look what happened after that. What are the museums and the cultural centers and galleries doing with this legacy? Not much, because you cannot do much with that, right? But there's a number of artists that are knowing or not knowing into this direction, and I really believe that programs like STARTS can be, from an artistic perspective, a way of understanding as a wider artistic expression that has a real impact in society, in economy. I'm not sure that all of us have this perception, but I guess there's a bright window there that I would like to bring up.
Any other comments? Christophe, maybe?
Well, I can say that the elitism, this is really true from within the art world. I can speak. I work for Center for Fine Arts, and the Center of Fine Arts was very conservative. There was not an art and science department. The most new thing they had was photography. But slowly but certainly, I tried to convince all the directors from the Center for Fine Arts that art and science was something interesting to look at. And the director is also coming tomorrow here. And slowly he also starts to change the whole policy of the Center for Fine Arts. For example, he will create inside the Center for Fine Arts a lab structure where people are invited, industrialists, artists, philosophers, to discuss, to show projects that are not finished. He's even thinking about changing the way you make exhibitions. For example, there will come a Picasso exhibition, and this is something you just buy. This is the art world in the worst sense, very expensive exhibitions that you buy. But he says, from now on, all the exhibitions that we make, I want them to be creations. So he will invite artists working with new technologies that also work on the basis of the exhibitions that come to the Center for Fine Arts and make something augmented around it, or experiment with the way you translate the exhibition to the public. So I think that from within a very conservative Center for Fine Arts, that the art world is changing very fast now because of the rift is becoming smaller between art and science and art world.
Any other reactions? If not, I would like to open the floor for questions from the audience. Oh, sorry, you need the mic.
In the discussion today and also in general, what I believe it's lacking, it's one structural point. We are speaking about art and science, which are the social activities. We are speaking about artists and scientists, which are persons, individuals with names. Sometimes we are speaking about laboratories and scientific institutions, but very rarely we are speaking about artistic platforms that are providing environments which can protect artists. Because as an artistic platform that is producing art of that kind, we are very heavily interested that artists are not doing science but art. And very probably the scientific institutions are interested that scientists are doing science, not art. However, they should work together. So, like in the case here at Ars Electronica, and I think it's symptomatic that we are now here and that we also bring the people we would like to persuade here to see how it's functioning. No? And if I'm quoting the director of Future Lab, he said, we are here to translate between both. So that somehow artists with their production can come, fully persuasive, and scientists with their questions, possible collaborations, offers, and so on. And we who are cultural workers, we can facilitate this communication between the two. So it's very important that we are establishing these environments where this discourse and this co-working between scientists and artists are happening. Because it's not only about gallery, it's about labs around that we are all having in order to facilitate the production. And I think that also in START's program, one of the three levels is to creating a platform. So there is a new platform that is going to happen. Ars Electronica is an established platform. There are some other small platforms that would like to take their role and grow, maybe even grow or became platforms where this kind of production can happen.
That's a reaction from the funding agencies. More platforms in the future. Infrastructure funding.
Structural funding. There's lots of money in structural funding.
Exactly.
I agree. I mean, if you talk to industrialists, then they tell you whenever relation to the art world worked, it was because there was some missing link between the art world and their engineers. So you don't take your artist and you put it into an engineering team. There has to be some sort of communicator. Mercedes, for example, has a communicator who will be here today, Alexander Mankowski, who really insists on this fact that there needs to be a buffer between his engineers and the artists who should contribute to the future of transport in Mercedes, for example. Ars Electronica is a wonderful example of a missing link of a translator, as Horst Hörstner calls it. Indeed, in Starts, we were thinking of a platform, and there will be an online platform, but it is not so much in the sense of Ars Electronica, it's more in the practical sense of having a database of artists and of industrialists and bringing them together. But you're right, this interaction needs to be moderated in some sense, and I think this is an important aspect.
Right. Andrea.
So within the PEAK program and at the Austrian Science Fund in general, we are actually, since you mentioned infrastructure funding, we are actually forbidden to fund infrastructure. That is something that has to come from the institutions as such, which is a pity. That was actually a new law that got implemented. So we don't pay overheads anymore that were able to be used for infrastructure. We pay them to the institutions, and they have to pay it to, their researchers, which they sometimes do and sometimes don't in different ways, which is a problem. So what happens within the PEAK program now is that the infrastructure that is, so any kind of workshop, any kind of platforms that are established normally take place within artist institutions, artist spaces, art universities as such. The other way around, some with the universities focused on technology, they also host quite a number of events. They also sometimes serve as what we call as national research partners, so they provide infrastructure as well. But we see that most of the interdisciplinary work that is taking place within the PEAK program is actually taking place in an artist environment. There are some applicants which would like to change that and are seeking to change that come really from the natural science background or science background and are trying to actually implement the artistic or art-based structures there as well, which has not been that successful yet, but which is an exciting endeavor.
Yes, John Miguel.
I would just like to emphasize this notion of the platforms, but even I think more relevantly is the notion of the need to invest in production, in making. Because if you look in the models of the funding of artistic practices, artists mostly look for selling or for galleries or for exhibitions as a source of money to keep doing whatever they do, which is creating. So actually, if you think it doesn't make sense that the actual act of creation is not funded, and because it's very difficult to be funded. In this sense, and what is relevant in terms of institutional bodies like the European Commission, is that we have to find a way that artworks are considered outcomes of research. As a paper is considered an outcome of research, as a prototype is considered an outcome of research, we will never have a significant role in the research world if artworks, exhibitions, all of these outcomes, which are the outcomes of our artistic practices, are not recognized as a concrete outcome, because they are actually concrete outcomes. And this I find extremely important. I still don't know how we're going to do it, but we will work on that.
Okay. Any other questions? Yes, Lucas. Sorry.
Well, Louis Miguel, can you say some more concretely about how we achieve that everybody sees that making the production of artworks is knowledge production as such, because that also has to do with science politics, whether science allows this to be regarded knowledge in order to get a piece of the cake there, to get that sort of making production funded.
So I think we have a window of opportunity, as we say in business. There's a revision coming or happening or in the making of the EU will try to unify research outcomes, because now they are actually different from country to country. So actually in some countries artworks are actually understood as scientific outcomes, which means that some of us, or possibly most of us, I don't, but many of people in the community work in universities. So when you work in a university and you're an artist, if you do an exhibition, it's not a brownie point in your CV and your boss is going to poke you. He's going to say, why didn't you write a paper and you did an installation? This already happens in some countries. I cannot specify now. My memory goes, I think, in the UK, Norway, Finland, something like that. But now there's going to be a revision in the European Parliament to actually unify this. And in this process of unification, we might be able to, if we have the capability of bringing this idea to the table, of achieving this, where actually is regulated, is standardized, that artistic works as exhibitions and all the outcomes are seen as valuable and valid research outcomes.
May I add something to that, because that's very important. It's also the case in Austria with the PEAK program. And that actually makes a huge difference for us as a funding agency, because, for example, we acknowledge artworks and exhibitions as part of the track record, and you don't have to have a master's degree or a PhD degree to actually, as an artist, to apply for the PEAK program and be eligible for postdoc funding, for example, which would not be the case if PEAK were to be part of the other programs at the FWF.
Yeah, and policy-wise, do you also then in Austria tap into all the funds that go to museums to make a case that they should also contribute to such a program?
Wait, could you repeat that, please? I didn't get that.
Yeah, well, I think that is interesting how you make a case for art and artwork production as research. But do you also have a lobby towards the heritage institutions, museums, that take a big chunk of the cultural money that is available?
Well, that's a bit tricky. You mean whether we also fund museums by people?
No, you ask your national government a chunk of the money that goes to museums to be used for your form of artwork production.
That's an interesting thought. Actually, I'm not aware that this has been a subject of discussion yet. But
well, I would like to bring that in as a subject of discussion.
Yes, no, that is certainly,
because we see in every European country that funding goes down for individual artist production, that funding goes down for small artist collectives, but that the funding remains intact for all the museums with their museum shops and their nice buildings and their huge budgets to buy pieces from the market that have been already bought with black money. So.
Right. That's something that's actually fairly new at the Austrian Science Fund, to bring in external money, because we used to get all our money just from the Ministry of Science, which has been changing slightly, so we'll see.
Yeah, if you talk about post-disciplinary collaborations, you should also break down these walls between science funding and museum fundings, I would say.
Yeah, Lucas, thanks. I wanted to save this discussion until the very end, but now that you brought it up, I mean, it's very early, but there will be a new framework program, probably. I'm asking, I think, everybody, but of course in particular people with EC backgrounds. Do you think you have the right support already to continue these activities? What's your strongest selling argument, or what would you need? How can these people here help in, I don't know, changing member states' opinions, or maybe it's not necessary, maybe you have already enough support? I don't know, who can I'm tempted to give it to Ralph. How can we help?
Well, first of all, I should say, of course, in the Commission we are separated in different Directorate Generals, and there's one Directorate General which is Education and Culture. And Education and Culture is supporting art, creation of art, also musea, and I have nothing to say about whatever policy they adopt, right? All I'm saying is money that is devoted to the art for the art's sake is coming from this Directorate General for Education and Culture. So if we put money into art in a directorate that is supposed to be creating the future of technology for Europe, then of course there has to be a return on investment for technology if we invest into arts. Otherwise, there's no way of justifying money that was given by politics to technology, suddenly spend it on art. So I guess there has to be a willingness to accept that whoever is funded as part of these technology programs has to contribute to technology. And there is a certain reluctance to accept that. But I think once this reluctance is overcome, there's a great willingness, at least on our side, to really invest into the arts as a means, as Luis says, of production, as a means of making technology more human-centered, as a means of using art as a means of social innovation. And I guess this principle is accepted. Whether this principle translates into funding is then another issue. And here, of course, it's where member states come in by saying this is something we as a member state are interested in. And as you know, we have been discussing with member states. It depends largely on whom you talk to, right? If you talk to Culture Ministry, then of course they are very happy to fund the arts. But if you talk to a technology ministry, then you have to convince them. That's obvious, right? But again, I think that funding for the arts within a technology program has to be justified and argued with what's in for technology. Otherwise, why bother? And I guess this is the main problem we have in STARTS, because this brings, of course, then certain issues of instrumentalization and certain issues of loss of independence that come up whenever you discuss with cultural committees and so on. You see.
Thorsten, can you support this? Can you help?
Can I help?
Does it help?
Am I here to help? I'm here to receive, I thought. Well, you asked the question whether we are ready for Horizon 2050 or whatever it's going to be. It's named the 9th Framework Program. Like the scientist in me would say, we get a lot of kind of administrative support, so I think we're quite good in navigating all the funding schemes that are on the market, the national ones, the European ones. All that works. It works as long as we do excellent research. And then it's just the lobbying and the sales arguments. But when we can do excellent research, now we will be fit for the next round too. The problem is once again infrastructure, because especially in experimental physics, quantum physics, as it was mentioned, we need machines, we need devices. We don't need only manpower and goodwill. We also really need lasers and labs and infrastructure and vibration stabilization and whatnot. And if there's no means to get this, then we will start falling behind, and that's kind of what's troubling us. That's a pure scientific perspective, but there has to be a solution there somehow.
Yes, can I, and then Annick after that. No, sorry.
Yeah.
Luis Miguel and then
Yeah.
Annick.
Okay. So now I'm lost. I forgot. I had a blank.
That's okay. Can you pass on the mic to Annick? And
Yes, I was just when you can
Come
see
to
me.
the fore.
I was just wondering, how do you evaluate and what are your criteria that you get the return on investment when you spend technology money on art? Because more or less in the art world, for good or bad, there are some kind of criteria on what is quote-unquote good artworks, and you know, there's some kind of evaluation within the art world, again for good or bad, and probably a lot. But when you said that we have to agree that if the money comes from technology side, it should be useful for the technology. What are your criteria? It's a really straightforward question, because I don't know.
I think it's a very good question.
Well, you see, technology is not a sake, it's not a goal in its own. Some technologists think it is, but I don't, right? Technology is a means for society to progress, and I think a lot of what art can contribute is indeed in helping technology become useful for the citizen. And I guess here it is where the art world can contribute and where it could be evaluated if it can contribute. So I'm not pleading for a technology for technology's sake argument. We do not fund technology for the sake of it. We fund technology for the future of Europe, if you wish to take a somewhat strong statement. So I think it is in this link between technology and society that the arts can contribute and should contribute. By making the technology useful for humans, by using smart city is a very, very good example. Smart cities, if you look at it from a technological point of view, it's nothing else but a bunch of sensors you put everywhere and humanity gets happy. See, the reality is different. The reality is you need the artist, you need not necessarily artists, you need somebody who makes this technology acceptable and useful for the citizen. And I think it's here that I see a lot of reasons why art can contribute in a positive way to technology. I'm not sure whether this answers your question or... Yeah.
This is a huge and strong discussion about, because you need also philosopher, you need sociologists, you need anthropologists, that you need designers, and all sort of social scientists to answer how you can make technology fit within a society, and then you have to find at the bottom level what is good for a society, and then we are in trouble. So I think this is a very touchy and delicate topic which should need much more than an afternoon here in Ars Electronica to be addressed. But I think this is something very, very interesting, and where the art could be maybe the sand, sand bite into the mechanism, just to say, are you going into a right direction? But maybe not, maybe something else. But I think this is a very interesting topic.
But you see, I mean, to have anthropologists, psychologists, designers in the loop is generally accepted. We have an enormous amount of programs which is called Science and Society. So there is no issue here with anybody to say you need anthropologists, you need sociologists, you need humanities in order to make technology more human, for example. So nobody doubts that. What is still rather rare is to consider art as a means to do that. And I guess with the STARTS program, which is a very small program, you see, we are talking about peanuts compared to what we invest in other areas. With the STARTS program, we want to seed this idea of the art as a valuable contributor to these ideas, you see.
Who's Miguel?
And this is where I remember what I wanted to say, because you were asking how can we help. And I guess that I would like to leave a strong message that the best way to help now is to deliver. Because now these very small peanuts of money are there, but they are there, and they were not there before. And I see this as our chance to prove that actually it's reasonable to bring artists into this field. Which means that if we come as newcomers, as new players in the field of research, and we're going to deliver what other people do, namely reports and all this sort of stuff, we are doomed. Because what we have to prove is that we are lighter, we are more agile, and we can deliver closer to human. So contrary to what you just said, we don't need strong nuclear stabilizers to do whatever we do. We can very easily, adaptively bring something, new applications, new ways of developing technology. And I think, and as you know, there are new calls coming very shortly for residencies, for new projects in the context of STARTs, and I strongly believe that these are the projects that have to be very concrete, bring something that is really consistent, material, concrete, that is different from what has been done before.
Immediate reaction to that, or yes? Then is that okay? Right.
So I'm very much with you, because we want to act and we're ready to act and we know where to go. And what I would like to say, that indeed art has been marginalized from the society. And if we look in the more ancient societies, and I think that the art is the mother of science. Through alchemy, the science was born. So society was before connected. Art was the glue of the society, how people came together. And for me, in these collaborations, what is important is we're not looking at the artists or scientists. It doesn't matter you're a scientist or a cleaning lady. We are all in this ride on spaceship Earth together. And art was this lubricator, was this common mental field. Whether you come together to sing, to dance, it doesn't matter. Now art has been marginalized. So, for example, our environment is shaping how we think. So before it was nature, then was architecture. Our buildings were conceived by artists. Today they are functional. Today all the reality we go through is extremely functional. Normal people don't have this avenue, they don't have this platform to practice art. As a cleaning lady, as an artist, as a scientist. When we come to work with scientists in a scientific institution, a very great benefit, these repercussions that go together, is we interact with students and we shape their, and we are told that students have great progress after working with us. So education is a very important part. So when you, and in science, the big problem is working on very separate domains and not kind of bringing the whole picture together. So I hope that maybe scientists have, artists and scientists working together can look more critically on the reality and have more comprehensive view. So I think artists should be brought as this kind of actors for communities through the platforms everywhere, into industry, into how we design buildings, into how we design interactions. So you create, and it's a daunting task. And the reason I'm inspired by science is there is this thing, turbulence, that we completely don't understand. And we, as science, we cannot describe turbulence. That's where all our simple equations break down. And turbulence, it's a kind of self-organization of a very complex system where all of a sudden from disorder comes order. And I think, and coherence. So I think artists are needed to create this kind of coherence in society through all different actors and just basically bringing us as humans together. It is very difficult, but in the past, our ancestors managed to do that. And that's how social progress was going. And there is a great imbalance today between the art that is practiced today, which thinks about today's programs, and let's say big museums that are cemeteries for old art, that are basically banks that possess huge amount of money in this. So if we look again at the history of humanity, the artworks are the most prized possessions that we have. So we have to take a little bit of this money from the museums and give it to the artists who work today. So Van Gogh of today does not commit suicide. Thank you.
So we have the museums of the past, the science for the future and technology, and the galleries for today.
Yeah, well, this is my intervention would be better positioned before her, because now what she did was almost as we can go now. But I would like, I wanted to put a right wording into what we are now trying to structure. And I would like to answer Anik, why art and why not design and anthropology and other practices? Because, and I would like to correct a little bit what Luis said. As I'm understanding the correlation in production in arts, science and technology, I would say that science is producing knowledge, while art is producing meaning. So when they meet, the scientist can understand better what their knowledge, how their knowledge influences society, how the products that engineers will create will change our society. And together with Horst, we are trying to invest this distinction between design thinking and art thinking, where design thinking integrated at the beginning of the project of the creation is where you see the possibilities and you creatively, methodologically try to find different solutions. This is how designers are doing. They are proposing solutions, while artists, in their art thinking, so to speak, they are posing new questions. They are opening blank territories to what the right answers need to be produced. This is why we are facing in nowadays consumerism a lot of products that already now we can envision their dead end. There is a lot of bullshit producing, but by involving artists with creating meaning and creating evaluation from the scratch, you can envision how the society can react, so you would, in decision making of how you would create your product, you would be better. And this is where artists can do what cultural workers cannot. Plus, philosophers can also produce meaning. However, what they do is that they're developing meaning on linear way, while artists, by addressing your senses, again, can go even deeper, and open new fields.
Thanks for that. Lucas, final reaction from the audience?
Well, that would mean also the rethinking of what return of investment is in those sorts of programs and what impact is. So we should rethink economical impact, we should rethink a return of investment in economical terms, but in other terms, I would say. Then you really make a place for this, not knowledge production, but meaning production, as Yuri just said.
Thank you, Lucas. Any more reactions from the audience? From the panel? Yes, one. Christophe, yes. Go ahead.
I would not be too much against the museums. I think it's
oh, that's
it's a fantastic. You say we are banks. I think in museums there's lots of people that do intellectual work. It's some sort of research that delivers inspiring stories. And what we do could fit in this really well. And I think we have to be constructive. When you look at the STARTS program, it will be V&A, it will be Centre Pompidou, it will be big institutions. And now is the moment that we can use them to tell an inspiring story. And I can tell you, bringing these big institutions, so stopping those big rifts that has been there since the 70s, but now that they are interested, to take them in the STARS program is fantastic. And it will really, I think, inspire also industrialists and their researchers in their R&D departments. It will inspire rectors of universities. I think it's something extremely important that we have the institutions with us. So that was my idea.
All right.
Museum as production entities, I think this could become a really interesting thing. And it's true what you say, museums should not only be the banks, and mostly it's like that, I fully agree. But we can open up museums to show also the stories of the researchers, what they learned from this collaboration, so that we don't only show artworks, but that we show through videos or other stuff what their profit was from this collaboration with artists, that they show the indirect results of working together with artists, because we always think of direct innovation and direct products, but there's lots of indirect things going on. And the museums can show this, they can make big publications, they can contribute a lot, I think.
Okay. Thank you very much. I'd like to conclude by, first of all, paying tribute to the funding agencies who funded this event. The Commission, actually with 2 projects. We only mentioned FEED, but we are actually also coordinating another project which is called DITOS, which is Doing It Together Science. It brings together organizations from all over Europe, and we do like, I don't know, several hundreds citizen science initiatives. So it's a massive activity, and one of the things we do is policy discussions like this to talk about the future of citizen science. But I would like to thank in particular the panel. I think this has been quite a lively discussion, perhaps a bit more lively than I thought, after everybody left after the FEED part. As for FEED, you have seen intermediate results. So I hope there will be final results very soon, which we are going to present at an exhibition which, well, we still don't know where. We have a few candidates, but it's going to be an interesting place. And I hope to see all of you there when we do so. Thanks for coming a lot, and thanks to the panel for participating in the discussion. Oh yes, and thanks to the artists. Yeah.